Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to everybody. My talk has some thematic crossovers, I think, with Martin's around questions of automation and autonomy, but on a slightly different subject, but also about politics in another way. What Gregoire Chamoyeux calls the tendency inscribed in the material development of the drone weapon system is one toward the disappearance of warfare as a human activity submitted to rules, however tenuously or intermittently applied, as Bernard would perhaps say. But one submitted to rules to be replaced now by more sombre machinations, as he says, of crime and punishment, regulated by an increasingly automated apparatus. This is my epigraph, by the way. The relative somberness between war on one hand and crime and punishment on the other might be debatable, of course. But what Chamoyeux means is that the automation and remote control of tracking and targeting and killing the enemy, which is currently termed going kinetic by the military, signalling and ultimately mechanistic animating of the chains of processes, communication links, software, hardware, and distributed military operators, legal advisors, decision makers, in regional, domestic and global command centres, and so on. The automation of all this involved in the drone weapon system removes the citizen warriors from the scene and the risk of combat. And this is what is more sombre for Chamoyeux. For it tends to close off not only the application of rules of combat, the conventions and laws of warfare, as they're called, somewhat paradoxically, that attempt to regulate the exercise of extreme violence, to limit the killing of the enemy to the combat situation, to protect non-combatants, and to circumscribe the territory in time and in space that is subjected to temporary redefinition as the battle space. The battle space, of course, is what used to be known as the theatre of war. Not only this then, but for Chamoyeux, the closing off is also the rezoning of the battle space as a space of existing and potential conflict, of insecurity rather than of war, one which is to be controlled rather than contested, where regulation, if not exactly law, and sanction, if not exactly punishment, replace the commitment and the risking of forces and the contestation of space with the manhunt for individual targets and the monitoring of collectives for emergent challenges to the imposition of control. And this rezoning necessarily implies a deterritorialising of territories understood as ethnocultural or national or even regional, and a reterritorialising of them as scalable elements in a global zone, a zone of control in real time, one whose machinations ideally control the future, realising the dream that Philip Lawrence identified as the watchword of modernity, that is, control of the future. I will explore dimensions of the onset of this tendency, approaching them through Bernard's thematics of automation and autonomy. From this perspective, the threat of the increasing automation of military violence should be approached as part of a broader unbalancing of the technocultural dynamics, composing tendencies toward automation and tendencies toward a greater autonomy for human individual and social political development. As a constitutively technical form of life, human life is always a process and a question of composing autonomy and the automatic. The question posed by our default, and every time I say our in this paper, the question is always, who are we now? The question posed by our default condition of technicity is simultaneously what to become and how to become. What, inasmuch as we humans are in default of an essence, which is always and necessarily prosthetically conditioned and realised, conditionally, through technical artifactuality. And how, inasmuch as technics is the medium of human individuation, as a dynamic of psychic and collective individuals. What and how are not only simultaneous but composed in an ongoing relation. The how of techniques conditions the possible answers to what or who we could or should be, and the who inflects the becoming of techniques in adopting its possibilities, realising it in the service of ethnocultural or other collective programs, and in idiosyncratically iterating their reproduction and opening up new paths from past potentials toward future innovations. This ongoing relation of human and technical individuation is an ensemble of forces or tendencies and counter-tendencies. And this is why Bernard's work is a necessary supplement to Chamoyeux's excellent philosophical response to the development of drones. And here I would like to acknowledge the contributions of my friend Dan Ross to the formulation of this paper in at least two ways. Firstly, through his editing together of selected passages from across Bernard's work, where the issues of autonomy and automation are explicitly addressed. He gave me a kind of a digest text, which ran for some pages. And the ensuing conversations we had about these. And secondly, his interest in exploring the theme of the tendency and the method of tendential analysis influenced my approach to this paper through our exchanges, inflecting my own engagements in this theme, which began with interest in Virilio's thematizing of the tendency and the accident some time ago. In the most ethico-political register, then, the what and how questions can be reposed together as how to become more human as opposed to more inhuman, less non-inhuman. How to adopt the extraordinary innovations in technologies for altering and extending our capacity to act, to think, and program our future. This ethico-political and technical question concerning the balancing of autonomy and automation can nowhere be more urgently and pertinently posed today than in regard to the deployment of remote and automated weapon systems by the quote-unquote advanced Western powers. I've already said that the material tendency Chamayou identifies envisages a perfecting of the modern project of control, and particularly of controlling the future. And my thesis is that advanced Western powers here follow this project beyond its measure, and not for the first time, and perhaps as a further aftershock of the passage to the limits of total war and onto the threshold of absolute thermonuclear war, but an aftershock that is also a foreshock of its further ramifications. They follow it in following each other, the US following and now outstripping the Israelis, with the other advanced powers such as China, Japan, South Korea, India, powers both Western and now global, as the outcome of centuries of globalization that Derrida called global Latinization. They follow this pursuit of a techniques of control in pushing it out of balance within the military, strategic, economic and geopolitical project, seeking a preserving of the peace, a metastabilization of global geopolitics, fostering political institutions able to sustain a representational function for their populations, establishing the rule of law, economic recovery and reform, socio-cultural normalization of trade, education, peaceful negotiation of difference, and so on. One could certainly debate whether the actions of the US and its NATO allies in Afghanistan, or the Israelis in Palestine and Lebanon, or of other recent military adventures by France, Australia, Russia, and others, live up to or only cynically or conditionally subscribe to the rhetorics enunciating these kinds of goals that I just mentioned. One could make, as several have, a compelling case that these military operations are better understood as part of post-colonial exploitation of the global South, with a rhetorical nod to the nice guy mask of Lyotard's nice guy totalitarianism. My proposal here is that howsoever that debate goeth, something beyond the post-colonial is going on here, or perhaps that the post-colonial project's inherent contradictions are exacerbated, accelerating towards its demise as a coherent project, however subject to contestation or condemnation, and therefore still to be called to account and subject to review or reform. The drive to develop increasingly automated weapon systems powered by massive state and private investment in a renaissance of the military-industrial complex, which was always a military-industrial education complex, and some of these new leading labs and scenes for the development of these technologies, including my own here, and this recent one. And this complex which has in more recent times formalised its long-standing relations with commercial media in the terms of the military entertainment complex. Here's a nod to Roger Stahl's wonderful book, Militainment Inc., and to the work of Tim Lenoir and Henry Lowood on the military entertainment complex. This drive leads the project towards this exacerbation, one which I think is best captured in a reading of Chamayou and other perceptive commentaries on these drone developments that is annotated by Bernard's analysis of the tendential dynamics of human and technical individuation, and in particular in this case through his sustained and intensifying engagement in these dynamics through the autonomy and automation theme of thematics. The epigraph that I had up before from the decadence of industrial democracies elaborates the stakes of the going out of balance of these tendencies for politics and the political subject. The major challenge today for reviving a properly political engagement with our contemporary technocultural situation is first to put ourselves in a position, or perhaps better called a posture, because the position is a little bit too static today. Put ourselves in a posture that is able to encounter, to take account of, and to collectively think through the automatic redoubling of technological developments that computational technology, in this quote, as the final epoch of grammatization, characterizing Western individuation, programs for us today. And I would like to ask Bernard what final means here exactly. It was a dernier, so it's not too difficult to ask you to remember a line from one of your 40 or so books. Cast your mind back there. Does it mean the latest? Does it mean the very last, the end of the Western? I was kind of intrigued on that. Computational technology names here the default technocultural program for the elaboration of the technical possibilities of digital computing and communication techniques, the predominant assumed paradigmatic redoubling of emerging technical forms, pursued with little or no reflection, thought or political deliberation, as part of techno-scientific advances, commercial and university R&D, state economic policy and infrastructure programs, and so on and so forth. Little or no reflection, that is, on its general direction of travel, you might say, on its tendential reformation of the modes of spatio-temporalizing, of mediating between individuals and collectives, of globalizing cultures and economies, of reformulating knowledge, experience, inquiry and informational database and real-time terms, and so on. Instead, there is a great deal of reaction in the form of alarmist and even extremist articulations of a lack of comprehension and control over the course of technological progress, along with misidentification of the nature and stakes of developments, the search for scapegoats, the reinvestment in absolute post-political value systems and beliefs, and perhaps most toxic and threatening of all, the cynical nihilist acceleration of the disarticulation of human and technical individuation, to be seen everywhere from collaborative CDO trading in the recent financial collapse, to the expansion of fracking, to the automation of military force projection. The first task of political thought is to undertake the labour of making evident this lack of reflection in Bernard's quote here, and its effect of rendering increasingly tendentially ignorant the individuals who are not stupid, but who need to struggle to remain so, that is, not stupid, as the first task of our non-stupidity, in order to reformulate a genuinely political collective intelligence. So politics is characterised here as an effort that must begin by addressing first the automatic adoption and implementation of digital techniques, in order to open up a viable space and time for fostering reflection on the conditions of political intervention in this automatic adoption of computation. Politics recommences with opening up a space in which the autonomy of the psychosocial doubling up of the automatic can be achieved with great effort, an effort which is getting harder as a digital automation of encountering the world, of thought, of research, socialising, etc., extends the sphere of what Philip von Hilgers called the discovery of what can be calculated. And this is so no more evident than in the case of the expansion of automated warfighting systems. The grammatization of war underway in the massive investment, experimentation and implementation of remote and semi-automated and automated surveillance, reconnaissance, targeting and strike systems is a particular case of this automatic program of computational technology. The discretization and reconstitution of experience, space and the time of conflict, strategy and politics, according to the computational dynamic, is proceeding apace as a techno-scientific, military, strategic and commercial program with profound linkages to commercial, cultural, education and entertainment spheres of digital transformation. So in the time remaining, I'm going to sketch out what's going to be 3, but I'll only have time for 2, interrelated signs or symptoms of this going out of balance of human and technical individuation in the current and projected developments in the conduct of military operations by the advanced powers of this final Western character. The first one is about the automation of the identification of the enemy. Drones supply multispectral image data, and the persistent flow of data feeds from these various sensors are treated by video analysis software designed to selectively identify key information required for intelligence analysis and targeting processes. These softwares perform statistical algorithmic procedures for making usable an overwhelmingly enormous database of pixels, set out to distinguish normal from abnormal activity in what Derek Gregory calls a sort of militarized rhythm analysis, to refer us back to our early paper, that is increasingly automated. This cutting-edge big data software development includes the NVS system. The NVS system, National System for Geointelligence Video Services, being produced under the direction of the arms manufacturer giant Lockheed Martin. NVS will filter, sort and produce video-on-demand reports through software agent functions comparable to Netflix's user profiling of preferences and related search. I'm basically summarising a journalistic report on it from a couple of years ago. Reports combine various statistics combining the full-motion video playback and resemble financial reporting on MSNBC or watching a football game on ESPN. Like all database processing software, the generation of useful reports depends on the quality of the metadata produced through the indexing of video data according to relevant categories. The allusion to SBN is more than illustrative. Chamayou notes that the US Army had licensed a version of the video analysis software that ESPN uses in its football coverage to aid research and development of its drone-supported counterinsurgent targeting. The software is especially good for collecting and cataloguing videos associated with a particular player from a massive archive of game coverage. And this dovetails with the desire to map and characterise the past actions of individuals identified as insurgent or terrorist. Play-by-play. This software processing of the pattern of the enemy as player is becoming increasingly automated. Projects, I think I've got it here as well. Yeah, projects such as the DARPA's, that's the Defence Advanced Research Project Agency's, DARPA's Mind's Eye, are working on artificial intelligence to analyse and annotate video automatically. I spy with my mind's eye, something beginning with T. Right? The envisaged visual intelligence would be able to learn generally applicable and generative representations of action between objects in a scene directly from visual inputs and then reason over those learned inputs. This is from the DARPA's press release of the announce of the project. Beyond machine vision, developments in pattern recognition and object identification, the ambition of this project is to automate a cataloguing of actions and relations between objects. The ever-growing flows of multi-spectrum video scans from battlespace will necessitate the implementation of such programs that are able to, quote, automatically translate the aggregations of pixels into nouns, verbs, and propositions. Systems and software such as NVS and Mind's Eye will supplement the suite of statistical and analytical software already in use. These include GeoTime, which gathers together, and we've heard about this from Edward Snowden's revelations, GeoTime, which gathers together and visualises various forms of location surveillance data, such as satellite monitoring and mobile phone signal tracking. Mobile phone tracking has become a significant contributor in the intelligence analysis supporting the targeting of individual insurgents in the deployment of drones to support or to execute targeted assassinations. It has also been at the centre of some of the more infamous mistaken strikes, such as the alleged killing of an election campaign team in northern Afghanistan by a joint operation that relied on cell phone tracking to identify, or in this case misidentify, the targets. The phone tracks are an important part of what is known as pattern of life analysis, used across the drone operations of both the US Air Force and the Joint Special Force operations that they are involved with, and by the CIA's targeted assassinations in northern Pakistan and elsewhere. A person's activities, associations, and electronic communications with others can be compared against a normal civilian set of routines and social exchanges for people in the surveilled territory in order to identify unusual patterns or associations, or links if you like. Such abnormal patterns indicate potential targets for further monitoring or possible assassination. The individual identified with such a pattern may find themselves graduating from the database of potential targets, which is called the disposition matrix, to becoming a nomination on the kill list under consideration in the Pentagon and ultimately by the US President. It has been claimed that strikes based on pattern of life analysis represent a significant component of drone-based hunter-killer attacks on individuals who are only known as potential threats through a process reliant on software-based analysis. These targeted individuals no longer need to be identified. They don't actually have a name. They're just a counterinsurgent, a threat, often. No longer need to be identified except as a certain kind of deviation from a norm established through the statistical modelling of sets of data that are drawn from full spectrum monitoring of the battle space. Their names and lived reality are less relevant than this conceptualisation of them as potential threat, known as a signature target, as opposed to a personality target, that's a known person. The signature refers to the particularity of their abnormal data pattern of movements, habits, and webs of associations that marks them as a threat. So be careful who you ring on your mobile phone or who's on their address book. In their anonymity and abstraction, the signature targets are the output of the programmatic generation of a pattern from data processing that is used to produce the targets in advance of their threatening movement or action. This is the point about preemption that Antoinette was making before. As Chamayou notes, this technical procedure instantiates a promise to, quote, predict the future and be able to modify its course through preemptive action. That's from Chamayou. Okay, my second example. I'm calling this rezoning of battle space as a zone of preclusion. So again, I'll start here from a specific technical procedure that's used to discuss the expansion and transformation of battle space. This procedure, known as the joint fire area today, and before that it had a much more colourful history as the kill box, been renamed the joint fire area. Interesting, why exactly? This procedure exemplifies the tendency toward the global extension of battle space as much as it's becoming perpetual, as always on, as 24/7, as Jonathan Crary might say. And in this I beg to disagree with Derek Gregory, who thinks that Chamayou makes a little too much of the techniques of this operational procedurality. And also in this regard, when I was quizzed recently in a similar vein by M. Shane Reeser, who's a US Air Force fighter pilot and squadron leader, who wrote a book called Killing Without Heart, which I think is quite a thoughtful reflection on the tendency toward automated military operations. I replied to Shane that it is in precisely such techniques of implementation that values, propositions, and projects are found in their most concrete form as systems of procedures, computational devices, communication networks, learnt and practiced automatically as part of the conduct of military operations. In such automatic and semi-automated procedurality is materialised the disappearance of the distinction between war and peace, battle space and sovereign territory, the time of living and the time of living under drones. Am I there? Sorry. Living under drones, which is no longer living but surviving. It's subsistence, not existence, as Bernard would draw the distinction. Joint fire areas or kill boxes are names for a procedural designation of physical space enabling the coordination of elements engaging targets within a specified area that is both temporary and scalable according to the nature of the target and the conditions and constraints of the operation. Now this is your procedure kind of diagram of how you sort of do it as a process. As Chamayou explains, the kill box describes a process as much as a space. One opens, activates, freezes, and then closes a kill box. The kill box is a zone of temporarily and flexibly realised virtual space. Virtual inasmuch as it comes into existence digitally, thanks to the real-time technologies of modelling, monitoring, measurement, and transition. It puts into practice the redefinition of traditional geographical and strategic political territory, begun with the theory of battle space. Kill boxes can in principle and in their virtuality as digital diagrams be opened anywhere in the world and be as small or as large as required, rendering irrelevant traditional geopolitical limitations such as national borders, city walls and geophysical boundaries such as mountain ranges, rivers and so forth. Chamayou speaks about the kill box's combination of precision measurement and flexible delineation, enacting a dual principle of the globalization and homogenization of space. It is in the technological implementation of such procedures that the redefinition of the theatre of war as battle space is concretised in the manner of the technical object. That is, as the ongoing materialisation of a tendency that demands critical theoretical as well as legal humanitarian attention. This is made clear in the history of the killbox concept that Chamayou dates to a 1996 US Air Force report envisaging the future use of unmanned aerial vehicles in zones of autonomous operation. The human rights and legal challenges to the expansion of targeted assassinations by drones and US Special Forces has focused on the way that they abandon the legal and conventional delimitation of the theatre of war as they identify and pursue targets in the global battlefield. War becomes a manhunt in Chamayou's thesis, conducted by the hunter on the basis of a unilateral claim to the right to pursue a suspected threat to the homeland anywhere it can be found. At the same time, the inhabitants of the now everywhere battle space become subject to a permanent regime of real-time surveillance, evaluating their movements, liaisons, communications, etc., in relation to the patterns of life that are ascertained, that is, modelled through the same processes, modelled to be normal, that is, non-threatening to the monitoring organisation. They've had first-hand experience of the capacity of this generalised battle space, these people living under drones. Their first-hand experience of how it instantiates a well-delineated zone in which the battle space is intermittently actualised by the semi-automated coordination of strike capabilities, which is the contemporary fleet in being that is permanently on call in the global borderlands, as Gregory calls them. Now, Gregory proposes that the military adventures in remote counterinsurgency at the borders of the West zones of control in Afghanistan and Pakistan will produce a vortex, as he says. If the battle space is now global, and if the United States claims the right to use lethal force against its enemies wherever it finds them, then what happens when other states claim the same right, and when non-state actors possess their own remotely piloted aircraft? Chamayou captures best perhaps the systemic dimension of this contradictory production of the very opposite of the secured geopolitical world future, projected with and through the current deployments of drones. He criticises the remote conduct of counterinsurgent operations, citing military strategist David Kilcullen's condemnation of these as the misuse of an effective tactic that threatens the very strategy of counterinsurgency, inasmuch as this strategy depends on the building up of relationships and sympathies between armed forces and local inhabitants on the ground. Chamayou sees here the victory of an anti-terror doctrine over counterinsurgent one. Moreover, dronified anti-terror can be understood as employing a perversely strategic logic, whose pursuit implies its own failure as strategy. The fact that drone operations tend to produce the conditions for the recruitment of more radicalised extremists, the core of the counterinsurgent strategist's critique of their use, this becomes the rationale for their expansion and technological improvement. The system incorporates its inherent contradiction in what Chamayou characterises as an endless spiral that is unable to decapitate the hydra that it itself permanently regenerates by the productive efforts of its own negativity. From my perspective, this endless spiral is not endless, and perhaps vortex is a better figure in this regard. For a vortex can suck in diverse elements and then disappear itself in a kind of self-destructive self-absorption. The extension of the battle space globally is a tendency toward a zone of preemption of threat, a zone of preclusion of the anomalous that fosters its own growth, actual growth. And like Tanguy's self-destructing machine, it is an automatism without future, at least without a viable future as a machine component of a human future, one in which a politically worked out composition of autonomy with the extraordinary powers of computational automatisms manages to maintain a space for living, not permanently contaminated by wartime. This political working out is a crucial element of this holding open of the possibility of questioning. This political working out is a crucial element of this holding open of the possibility of questioning in the face of the inorganic drive that Bernard speaks of in this passage from What Makes Life Worth Living. Well, thanks very much.